For our RSI live example, I will ask that you please go to your course content and open our RSI notebook so that we can follow along together. All right, with that, I'm going to explain each of the lines here and kind of what we're doing. I chose the Y finance call because, as we covered in some of the earlier sections, it's a pretty simplistic way to grab the information, very easy to manipulate, very few lines of code, so it really boils down the complexity for these examples. But if you'd like to try to use some of the other calls, such as the alpaca or the Robin Hood, you're more than welcome to do that as well, and these are applicable. It's just going to change a little bit depending on what the column names are, so we'll try to call that out as we go through and learn. Another quick tip, if I go through this and I butcher any explanation, I apologize. I'm sure some people will get on me here, but again, it's not really the RSI we're looking for, but more the theory behind creating your function, being able to grab it, and then passing it to that data frame. So if you're looking for a deeper explanation, I even find things like Wikipedia here does a pretty good job of explaining what we're going to do and how we're going to calculate it, and then what the output of that variable is. So now jumping in, our first indicator, again, the RSI, we're going to walk line by line through this and explain what's happening. So first, very similar to what we did with our early Y finance module, we have to import Y finance as YF. We choose YF just because it's easy to look through the code and call all the Y finance functions as YF and remember that later. So we're calling Y finance so that we have access to the API calls via that module. And we're going to use that a little bit later down here. But first, as we walk down through the code, the setup of the Python notebooks, you're going to put your functions, at a higher location. So you're going to define your modules, you're going to define your variables, and then you're going to define your functions, and then you're going to put the things that run your code here at the bottom. So first, we are actually going to build our function, which we're going to utilize a little bit later. But in this, we want to keep everything in this notebook so you have a live example. But we're going to build our function to actually calculate that RSI. So as I mentioned in the previous setup, we are going to build this function to input the closed list from our Y finance call that we're going to call here in a few steps. And we're going to tell it the number of periods that we want to evaluate the RSI for. So very simply, as we walk down through here, we're going to create a delta variable that will calculate the difference of our closed list. So it's going to very simply take that last value minus its previous value and create a difference or a delta column so that we can see what those differences are. We are then from there going to create two additional columns, an up and a down, that will grab a delta of the upper values and the lower values being bound by 0 here. So you're getting the clip of all of the values that are saying the indicator or that the delta went up, so that the stock went up in price or the stock went down in price. From there, we are going to calculate exponential moving average up and down of those periods. So we're going to go out over the certain number of periods. So in our example, we're going to use the previous 21 periods, and we are going to look at look for all the values that were up and down and calculate that exponential moving average over that last 21. In our example, it's going to be last 21 minutes of time. From there, you're going to create an RS value, a relative strength value of the up divided by the down, and then put that in finally into our RSI value. And in this call here, you'll see that calculation in this section. And then we are going to actually introduce you to the math function round here as well, so that we can put this into just a very simple 2 decimal feedback, so that we're not getting 10 decimal periods out past what we want. So I'll walk this through again once we pull this information just one more time, and then we'll pull this up and show you what it's actually doing. But then from there, we're going to return out of this function call our RSI, so this value that is actually calculated here. All right, so walking down, this should look familiar. We're going to assign AAPL to our Y Finance call. We're going to pass it the ticker AAPL, so we're going to grab ticker information for Apple. We're going to use the .history API call from Y Finance to get 2 periods worth, or two days worth of information at 1 minute intervals. So we're going to grab 1 minute intervals for 2 days worth of information. Now down here is where it starts to get a little tricky, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this so we can show you exactly what is happening. So in this next call, we're actually going to do a couple things at the same time. So first, you'll notice we've got our function call. So we are going to call our function by putting in here calc RSI, so the name of the function, and you can see that we are going to pass it these 2 requested values that are needed to calculate this function. So the 2 inputs that we defined here as the close list and the number of periods. So for this, since we're calling Apple and we're creating this this data set within this AAPL, we know that this is now assigning a data frame to AAPL. We are going to take the close column of the data frame by grabbing AAPL.close, and we are going to tell it we want to calculate it over a 21-day period. Or sorry, not 21 day. And I've even got the wrong explanation there, but not 21-day period, sorry, a 21-minute period, because we're grabbing this data again at minute intervals over a 2-day period. So for the last 21 minutes, I want to calculate the RSI based upon the close values. Now this call here is going to be where some magic happens for us later. So what this is actually doing is, since we've created a data frame, there are multiple columns, as you know, such as close, open, high, low, that are assigned to Apple, and we are now going to actually, at the same step, create a new column to our already existing data frame called RSI 21, and we are going to take the values from this function call at 21 periods, and we are going to pass them back once they're created and calculated, and add them to this AAPL data frame. So we're going to go ahead and run it, and then I will print out a couple of these values to actually show you what that looks like on that return. So if I go ahead and run, I can go ahead and now show you what AAPL has assigned. And the output here, you can see we've got our standard data frame of what was from our previous example, where we have that 1 minute interval period over the last 2 days. We have the open, high, low, and close values from our data frame. And we also have the RSI 21 calculated over the last 21 periods. Now for this, again, since it's over the last 21, you're going to notice there's not a lot of values here at the top, because it's going to actually go a revolving 21 back. So this is going to look at the previous 21, this is going to look at the previous 21. So as you go up through these values, you'll notice as we get closer to the end here, if there's not 21 values, you'll start to see some zeros and nulls where it doesn't have enough information to actually calculate. All right, so going back through and showing you what is happening within our what is happening within our call, we just want to walk through this. If you want to see at any point in time what's happening with these functions, it's important to note that you can also do things like print at different steps, so that if you want to see what this value is doing here, instead of having to wait until it gets to the end and adds RSI to it, you can actually add calls like print in, rerun it, and it'll show you what you've got from a beginning phase to what we end up with. So here, before we put it into a nice data frame export utilizing just this function call, this isn't a data frame, but when you use the print function, it's gives you more of this block format versus this cleaner pandas look here. But you can see that we're stuck with our original data frame that has that open, high, low, and close. But when you scroll down a little bit, we've now got the RSI added because we are calling AAPL after it has been assigned and went up and gotten those values. So from here, again, we're just going to look very closely at what we're passing. So I'm going to clear the outputs. We're going to rerun this. You know what? I'm going to delete this and clear them again so that we got a clearer view. Okay, so walking down through this again, we've got our function call. When we run our code, nothing happens until we get to here, where we're actually specifically assigning a variable. We're not running this function because it hasn't been called yet. So we're going to get here. We are going to call yfinance, pass it the Apple ticker. We are going to get 2 days worth of data at 1 minute intervals. And we are going to assign that data frame that returns to our AAPL variable. Once we get to our next step here, we are now going to do multiple things. We are again going to call our function, and we are going to pass it the AAPL dot close. So we're going to pass it this column very specifically here of this data frame, and then we're going to pass it a 21 period value in which we want to assign to a new column that we are calling AAPL RSI 21, which we see here. Once we pass this close value in that 21 period up to here, we're giving it the close list and the periods, and it is now going to calculate based upon the close list these values. It's going to take in our number of periods to calculate that exponential moving average, and then it is going to get down here and calculate our RSI and create a column that will be assigned to our new data frame. As always, in each of these sections, you have the ability, if you want to dig down a little deeper into this, is to find out what's going on. You can come down here and run this output to CSV. Again, this drops this within the folder here, so if you run this, I can run it for you real quick. You can see that it actually creates, this created a test.csv here in my same folder. So if you run this, it's important to note that if you're using ones with the same value from clip to clip as we go through each of these courses, if you've still got it open, it's not going to let you save, of course, because you're trying to resave over a file that you have open. So if you run into any errors when this goes to export, just check and make sure you've got that file closed. Change the name here if you want to call it something different because you want to save the old test, or something we've maybe called AAPL.csv in previous sections. But again, very handy tool for exporting that data and being able to see every row of this data frame. So another good quick tool. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this first section, and please, as you go through, feel free to tweak this, change the number of days, play with, it's not really an RSI. If you pass it an open, you pass it a high, you pass it a low, but feel free to, toy around with this and make sure that you know how to pass it these other columns if you want to, learn about the function calls. Change the naming here to see what it does to your data frame. Change the number of periods if you want to evaluate this on daily data or 5-minute data versus 1-minute data. So come in here, and I just recommend playing with this information, playing with the function, seeing what it does, learning. Change the rounding if you'd like, so you can see down here where we've got it to 2 decimal points if you want to make it 4. There's a lot of different things you can do with even just this little bit of code. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump to our next simple metric.